When people are curious, they turn to Google for answers. So why not use Google Ads to turn that curiosity into customers for your business? With Google Ads, you can reach the right audience with the right message based on what they're curious about. Whether you're looking to drive sales, generate leads, or increase brand awareness, Google Ads has solutions tailored to your marketing goals. Google Ads. Turn curiosity into customers. Visit ads.google.com today.
Shopping these days can be underwhelming, but at QVC, we believe those who love to shop deserve a living, breathing way to shop, where product descriptions are alive with demos by creators, chats with inventors, and hosts who know the most. From self-care and kitchenware to fashion trends and forever faves, at QVC, we bring life to products and products to life. Shop QVC.com/podcast and use code QVC15podcast for $15 off $30 for new customers. This is shopping brought to life.
I signed an order appointing Jack Smith.
And nobody knows you.
And those who say Jack is a fanatic.
Mr. Smith is a veteran career prosecutor.
Wait, what law have I broken?
The events leading up to and on January 6th, classified documents and other presidential records.
You understand what prison is?
Send me to jail.
Welcome to episode 23 of Jack, the podcast about all things special counsel. It is Sunday, May 7th, and I'm your host, Andy McCabe.
Hey, Andy. I'm the co-host here, Allison Gill. Lots of major breaking news in the special counsel investigation this week. I know we talk about this every week. Like, what could next week possibly bring? Well, a host of new stuff. We've got a deeper dive into the potential wire fraud case surrounding the Save America PAC. We have another member of the Ocha Nostra testifying before the grand jury.
Yes.
And if you haven't been a listener for a while, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. But the Ocha Nostra, we'll go over who that is. Those are the 8 Trump aides, allies, and folks who were ordered to testify by Chief Judge Beryl Howell after Trump tried to fight their testimony or block it using executive privilege. And we have some more information about the testimony of former Vice President Mike Pence.
We do, and the cornucopia of news, special counsel news continues, because we've also got breaking news from the Times about potential gaps in the Mar-a-Lago surveillance footage subpoenaed by DOJ. Also, a Trump insider who may be cooperating. Testimony from the Calamaris, my 2 favorite Calamaris. Additional subpoenas and a potential new arm of the investigation into Trump's involvement in the Saudi-backed LIV Golf Tournament. We'll go over all that, and we'll take some listener questions.
Awesome. And if you have any questions for Andy or me or both of us, you can send them to us via email. The address is hello@MuellerSheWrote.com. Just put the word Jack in the subject line. And Andy and I also would like to thank you and all of the patrons who joined us last Sunday for our cocktail reception in D.C. It was so much fun.
It really was. It was great to see everybody in person. I mean, we had some folks who traveled a long way to get there too. Seattle, a bunch of people from New York, New Jersey. So thanks so
Denver,
much for thanks so much for coming and enjoying a really fun night with us. All right, so shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do this.
So we'll start with the expanding investigation into wire fraud. Now, this has been one of our kind of favorite things to talk about over the last several weeks, because we saw this one early on, Allison, as a very, there's a lot of potential here in terms of putting some solid, maybe less fancy, less sexy charges, but nevertheless solid charges, easier to prove on the plate. And so we get some reporting this week from Haberman, Foyer, and Swan at the New York Times, which indicates that federal prosecutors have been drilling down on whether Mr. Trump and a range of political aides knew that he had lost the race, but still raised money off of claims that they were fighting widespread fraud in the voting results. So in the past several months, prosecutors have issued multiple batches of subpoenas in a wide-ranging effort to understand the Save America PAC. As you know, Allison, the first round was sent out before Jack Smith was appointed.
Mm-hmm.
And that one, of course, focused on, Republican officials and vendors and people who had received payments from Save America. But it's changed a bit recently. Recently, investigators have homed in on the activities of a joint fundraising committee made up of staff members from the 2020 Trump campaign and the Republican National Committee, among others.
Yeah, and they've really been heavily focused on that, the details of the campaign's finances, their spending, their fundraising, such as who was approving the email solicitations that were blasted out to lists of possible small donors, and what those folks who helped coordinate that knew about what they knew about the fraud claims. That did they know that they were, false claims, that they were deceiving and defrauding donors, right? I mean, that's right. Whole cornerstone of a wire fraud charge, which, by the way, carries a 20-year max sentence. It does. It's not a little pittance. I'm sure the Trump folks will refer to it as a process crime or something, but
technicality. It's a mere technicality.
It was a perfect campaign. These were fundraisers. They were perfect emails. But we saw a lot of this in the January 6th testimony, like from Ronna Romney McDaniels and the RNC and things like that. So I mean, they're really homing in on this.
They really are, and that one aspect of it, that question. That they are going after who specifically approved each email. That's the pry bar getting just behind the door, right? That's just as you got the pry bar in there, and now you're really starting to lean into it to pop that door open, because whoever approved the message, that's the person you can attribute the statement to. So it goes from taking a random email from the Trump organization or the Trump campaign or whatever, and turning it into the statement of John Smith. It enables you to pin that charge on that person, and it puts that person in a position to say, wait, no, it wasn't just me. It was these other people as well. So that's how you start to get people rolling in.
Yeah, it was Parscale, and then Parscale says, no, it was Parlator, and Parlator said, right. No, it was Epstein, and then Epstein goes, no, Trump told me to do it. Yeah,
that's exactly it. It's the roll-up.
Yeah, it's exactly
totally
it. And what's the difference here, and you can speak to this pretty well, is the teeth that DOJ has that the January 6th committee did not have, because they're able to bring criminal charges to the DOJ. And according to this reporting from the Times, the DOJ has been able to prompt more extensive cooperation from multiple witnesses. And, to take that a step further, the prosecutors in Jack Smith's office have been able to develop more evidence than the House committee did, because they have targeted communications between Trump campaign aides and other Republican officials to determine if those fundraising solicitations were knowingly misleading, right? So that's important, because the January 6th committee was not able to get a lot of this evidence from their subpoenas. Particularly, I'm thinking, if you remember, they subpoenaed Salesforce, which was the outside vendor, probably paid by the Save America PAC, which is part of this huge, big first round of subpoenas. And they had to basically give that up, and the RNC as well. So they couldn't get a lot of that evidence. But the DOJ, according to this reporting, has subpoenaed Salesforce and other vendors too. So it's like, it's kind of disheartening that a co-equal branch of the government like Congress wouldn't have this kind of ability to extract this information. It kind of makes their ability to provide oversight a little bit less toothless than the Department of Justice. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right. The difference on the DOJ side is criminal penalties. The ability to levy criminal penalties on human beings for first ignoring subpoenas, being held in contempt by Congress doesn't mean much to people.
Or lizards in human being suits, like Ted Cruz.
Yeah, exactly. But going to jail for contempt does matter to people. So, and there's no, Congress holds you in contempt and they vote on it, or I guess they vote first and then hold you in contempt, and then they serve a referral to DOJ, which basically has no weight whatsoever. DOJ doesn't have to do anything with that. So there's all kinds of handicaps built on that side of the system. Not so much on the DOJ side. If you don't respond to the subpoena, you can be held in contempt. If you refuse to hand over everything, they could start investigating you for obstruction. So there's teeth to that. And the same is true with charges over witnesses, right? So you have the ability to hold people criminally responsible is a great incentive to get them to cooperate and start providing information and assisting the investigation. Congress doesn't have either of those two powers. And so, they don't get as far. It kind of like brings home this point that government oversight works, and you get that check and balance between Congress and, let's say, the federal agencies, the executive branch, because people prior to the Trump administration, even though they didn't like it, you submit to it. It's the right thing. Nobody likes to go up and testify in front of Congress, especially about bad news. Trust me, I did it many times. It was always awful. But you do it because that's what's required. That's what our system calls for. It's right that Congress, the side of our government that's most answerable to the voters, has this sort of power over the executive branch agencies. And of course, they control the budget, and that's a lot of power as well. So, but once that system starts falling apart and people begin ignoring their obligations to comply with oversight, you get an executive branch or an administration that's kind of just decides to thumb their nose at it and run amok. And I think we saw a lot of that during the 4 years of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and we've seen this sort of happen over and over and over again with Congress versus DOJ. Not, I don't mean like they're going head to head, but to get information, to get subpoenas, because that's sales. When the 1-6 committee subpoenaed Salesforce was like, "Yep, sure, you can have it all. It looks weird to us too. We don't like it either. We thought this was strange too. Here, have everything." And then, of course, the Trump side stepped in and said, "No, wait a minute. We want to sue to block this." And of course, being the third party, you're going to wait until that whole thing is resolved.
Right.
But so DOJ was able to get the Salesforce stuff. We saw it with the RNC. DOJ was able to get the RNC stuff. We saw it with John Eastman and the Chapman University emails. Chapman University was 100% willing to hand everything over, but they had to go through a 9-month protracted privilege battle and using crime fraud exception to get anything over to the January 6th committee. Meanwhile, Merrick Garland had all of Eastman's emails before the committee even had held hearings. We saw it with Mazars and the Trump organization. The criminal, prosecutors and investigators were able to get those tax returns, toot sweet, whereas it took Congress, 3-4 years to be able to get the tax returns. So. And I think that, and a lot of these privilege battles also go much, much faster when you're talking about the Department of Justice. So, for those that we see sometimes the talking heads talking about how the DOJ is dumb and the January 6th committee is God and the January 6th committee did so much more than the Department of Justice. I just want everybody to step back and take a 30,000-foot view and see exactly what the Department of Justice has been able to get without much, without many trials and tribulations, so to speak. That the January 6th committee simply was unable to achieve. And I'm not saying that it's because the January 6th committee didn't do the work. They certainly did, but and they did their level best to get this information and evidence, but it's just so much easier for the Department of Justice to get it.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, Congress, the January 6th committee was essentially a political, it's a political institution, and it was a political effort. I don't mean in terms of Republican or Democrat, but just in that it's part of the political side of government. And at the end of the day, the courts recognize, I don't want to say a greater legitimacy on the criminal side, but maybe a more essential nature of what the criminal side of our government is doing. Like, you have a grand jury, these things need to happen quickly. Prosecutors need to be able to access witnesses and evidence before the evidence disappears, or the witnesses lose their recollections, or are vulnerable to tampering by people who might not want them to testify. So the courts recognize that. That's why you see these privilege battles being teed up and heard and decided quickly, instead of how long did it take for Don McGahn's privilege claim to get litigated before McGahn ever showed up anywhere to talk to anyone? That was over a year in litigation. So
I know. And then he finally did. Then you're like, okay, yay. And so I think that this is all just, very important sort of information to have in the back of your mind as we continue forward with these investigations, and also how long it takes us to get news from the Department of Justice versus us I shouldn't say from the Department of Justice, I should say about what the Department of Justice is doing, because
That's right.
the 100% of this is not coming from the DOJ. It's coming from
Right.
elsewhere, witnesses and witnesses' lawyers. But, some other things that have been looked at here by these prosecutors include the nexus between research that the Trump campaign commissioned immediately after the election to try to prove fraud. They've been looking at public statements that Trump and his allies made at the time, their fundraising efforts, and the establishment, like why establish Save America in the first place? And remember, Jack Smith has obtained the testimony and reports and documents from 2 firms now, the Berkeley Research Group, which was paid $600,000 by the Trump campaign to look for voter fraud, and Simpatico Software Systems, which was paid $735,000 by the Trump campaign, or at least they were billed. The Trump campaign was billed. I'm not sure these payments have been made.
The accounting, we're not really sure how that worked out, but we'll see.
But the grand jury's been asking questions related to whether Donald was briefed on these findings by Berkeley, suggesting there had been no widespread fraud, and also by the CEO of the Simpatico Software Systems. So,
Yeah.
And both of them came back. They looked over 12 different subjects of potential voter fraud. And when Donald Trump made that phone call to Brad Raffensperger on January 2nd and said, we found 5,000 dead voters. But on January 1st, the report from Berkeley Research Firm said they found nine dead voters in Georgia.
Right.
And so did Trump know ahead of that phone call to Raffensperger to find 11,780 votes? Did he know that there weren't 5,000 instances of dead people casting ballots in Georgia, and that there were only 9 from this thing? But we do know from an Eastman email, by the way, like which I said Jack Smith has had for a while. The DOJ, actually Merrick Garland got it a long time ago. We know that Trump signed on to a lawsuit in Georgia after Eastman had advised him not to because the data had changed. And so it appears that he was advised, at least per those emails that were handed over under the crime fraud exception.
Yeah,
so,
don't let that data change. Stop. Just charge right ahead and sign that court filing, basically attesting that everything is true and to the best of your ability. It's interesting too on these 2 research group or Berkeley and Simpatico. I totally get why the grand jury is asking questions about whether or not Trump himself was personally briefed, because that's what you want as a prosecutor. You want to be able to have a witness identified who's going to sit on the stand and say, yeah, I sat in front of Trump and I told him X and he, had a panic attack or whatever, however he reacted.
He threw the ketchup and...
Right. But short of that, you can still get a lot out of these developments, even without that link to his personal briefing, right? You get the software guy comes in and he testifies, this is what we did. We prepared a brief and we sent it to this person, or we actually briefed this person in the White House. Then you got to bring that guy in, and who did he communicate it to? And you get it all the way as close to Trump as you can. And that final link is going to be someone who maybe says, oh, I don't remember if I ever told Trump. Okay.
Meadows or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. How often, Mr. Hypothetical Meadows, did you get information like this and not tell the president? Isn't it your job to tell the president? So there's what I'm trying to say is you can leave the suggestion. You can raise the issue for the jury to consider whether or not it's reasonable to conclude that Trump paid over $1 million for all this research and never, ever heard or cared about the result. I mean, that's the kind of thing that a jury can say, yeah, I just don't believe that. I
often, I go to the vet and I spend $10 million on my cat, but I don't want to know the results of any of the tests.
Don't tell me.
The cat is alive. It's a spectacular cat. He's walking around. Everything's fine. My other lawyers told me that the cat is fine.
And now let's add to your hypothetical. Imagine you were the type of person who routinely stiffed people and did not pay them what you owed them. So we know that like if $1 million goes out of the vet,
I don't like these results.
That's right. $1 million goes out of the pack to these two companies.
Almost a 1.5 million, like 1.
Yeah. It's not. It seems highly unlikely that he had zero knowledge of what was happening.
Although I'll tell you what, if you claimed that you were going to, you were fundraising to find election fraud in the Election Defense Fund, and you spent $1.5 million looking for it, that's reasonable. But where'd the other $248 million go? That's the problem, right?
Ultimately, it's like a willful blindness type of argument, right?
Yeah.
Well, okay, so you spent all this money to find all the, and what did you? Oh, I don't know. I don't know whatever happened from any of what did we get from all that money? I don't know. I should ask the guys. I should ask the team someday. It's just not, it's not credible. So if that's going to be his biggest defense, if I were the prosecutors, I'd be like, okay, yeah, come on in. Put that defense on. Well, I'm happy. I'm comfortable with that. They've lined up a lot of witnesses and evidence and information that they could put on to counter that defense, counter and raising it in the terms of a willful blindness sort of argument.
Yeah, and you can't just say that because a couple of dollars were spent on researching election fraud that the whole kit and caboodle that you raised was like every dollar has to have gone toward that. I mean, you can't, unless you specifically say in your thing that, only part of this money is going to go toward that. The rest goes to me and my yacht or, whatever it is. And there were really no disclaimers on any of these emails that say that.
Right.
And that was one of the issues Salesforce had and why they were so willing to hand their junk over to the January 6th committee. But were eventually stopped. But, as I said, Jack Smith has subpoenaed Salesforce. I'm sure he has all that information by now.
Right.
All right. Well, we have some blockbuster reporting from not only the New York Times, but CNN as well. It's kind of piggyback reports, and we're going to talk about that, but we're going to take a quick break first. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Detroit was formally declared bankrupt in 2013. Since then, the city has rebounded by attracting new investment. Through support of Detroit's Strategic Neighborhood Fund, JP Morgan Chase is helping create more equitable neighborhoods for all residents. Learn more at jpmorganchase.com/impact.
When people are curious, they turn to Google for answers. So why not use Google Ads to turn that curiosity into customers for your business? With Google Ads, you can reach the right audience with the right message based on what they're curious about. Whether you're looking to drive sales, generate leads, or increase brand awareness, Google Ads has solutions tailored to your marketing goals. Google Ads. Turn curiosity into customers. Visit ads.google.com today.
For the Millers, movie nights were once tradition. Now Sarah could hardly get through the opening credits, not on that old couch. But one day, while shopping on QVC.com, she learned La-Z-Boy recliners had slimmed down a bit. And in just a few clicks, Sarah got her La-Z-Boy chair and a popcorn maker and a soundbar by Bose. And with one quick trip to QVC.com, movie night and Sarah's back were saved. Shop QVC.com/podcast and use code QVC20podcast for $20 off $40 for new customers. This is shopping brought to life.
Hey, everybody, welcome back. All right, let's get into the latest in the documents case and some explosive reporting from Caitlin Pollance and Paula Reed over at CNN, followed up by reporting from Haberman, Foyer, Protas, Goldman, and Schmidt at the Times.
Yeah, and first of all, the reporting from CNN says that it's time to play this jingle. Subpoena. Yes, last year, the Department of Justice subpoenaed the Trump Organization for 5 months of Mar-a-Lago surveillance footage, and the handling of that subpoena has triggered a new round of subpoenas from Jack Smith, including Matthew Calamari Sr. and Matthew Calamari Jr. Both Calamaris testified Thursday, and we learned about this on Thursday, which is a testament to how leak-proof the Jack Smith probe is, and we talked about that sort of this just wall of cone of silence within this investigation, and how Judicial Watch. Tom Fitton tried to get the names of the Jack Smith prosecutors. So, they could sick the IRS on them for intense audits or whatever. But that Jack Smith's like, nope, and then just goes back into his turtle shell and keeps prosecuting, keeps investigating. But both of the Calamaris testified Thursday. We learned about it Thursday. Now, Calamari Sr. is the executive VP and COO of the Trump Org, and he largely oversees security for Trump properties, among other things. And his kid, Calamari Jr., is the director of security for the Trump Org. And the Calamaris, according to this reporting from the Times, are only two of several witnesses that testified on Thursday, but we don't have any info on who else was there that day. And we also know that prosecutors have previously brought in lower-level Trump employees for questioning about the surveillance footage specifically, including, Andy, how it may have been handled in response to the subpoena for it, and if it could have been tampered with.
Yeah. That is there's a lot packed in here that's really interesting. First, I would say the fact that they're still bringing in new witnesses, that's a sign of kind of a healthy grand jury investigation, right? You're creating new and viable leads from the testimony of earlier witnesses. And that's we've talked about this before. Grand jury subpoenas typically go out in round after round and that shows that you're actually making progress and you're getting from one place to another. Secondly, that the article also says that some former witnesses have now been brought back, and sometimes for very brief testimony. So that could be a sign that despite the productivity of the grand jury, it may be honing in on a result, right? Because you bring back a witness when after they've testified and then you've reviewed their testimony and then you heard from someone else, a lingering question comes up, some new issue that you didn't have a chance to ask them about the first time has now just been uncovered. And so you need them back to kind of clean up that detail. So that's likely what's happening there.
It's narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. You and I first reported in one of the first handful of episodes of the Jack podcast that Jack had sent out huge, sweeping subpoenas for 13 different things, including anybody who was at the legislative branch that impeded the electoral count, anybody who in the executive branch that impeded the electoral count, documents concerning fundraising, anybody who was a VIP at the rally on 1/6. Anybody who basically had anything to do with anything ever surrounding January 6th.
Right.
And we saw the same with the documents too. And now it's getting narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And now we're down to the narrow scope of the surveillance footage that was subpoenaed secondarily to the documents, right? After that, Jay Bratt went down to Mar-a-Lago on June 3rd and got those 38 documents in a Redwell double-taped envelope. Yep. Then on June 24th, we got this subpoena for the surveillance footage. And so, that's pretty huge news. And they go on here to say, seriously, this New York Times report has like 15 different headlines.
There's so many many directions it's going.
Now, investigators, according to the New York Times, have previously asked about a text message from Walt Nauta, not a good witness, to Calamari Sr. and subsequent conversations about the surveillance footage. And it seems like a lot of this new investigatory, processes have been born from the fact that Walt Nauta didn't cooperate with the Department of Justice. And so that's kind of how this sort of thing works. And we'll get into that in a little bit of detail in a minute. But the Times expanded on this particular report about the Nauta text message thing, stating the DOJ had previously tried to get Walt Nauta to flip, but then he buttoned up. There's a carrot and a stick, right? You can go in with the carrot and say, hey, you're awesome, tell us the story. Or you can go in with the stick and say, we're going to charge you with something if you don't help us. And they chose the stick and threatened charges against Walt Nauta, which caused him to retreat and lawyer up. And he wouldn't play ball at all. So that kind of forces the DOJ to begin investigating him as a target. And it seems like a lot of this surveillance footage stuff has come out from Nauta's unwillingness to assist the DOJ, they may not have found that text message if Nauta had cooperated. And that text message may have been the thing that led to the Calamari subpoenas, and then which may have led to the fact that they found gaps in these tapes. I don't know sort of what order everything went in, but it's really expanded now. And I wanted to ask you, because this happened a lot in the Mueller investigation. There were a lot of people who were very uncooperative, recalcitrant, obstructy, and they wouldn't provide good information. And so you had to start investigating them, which turned up all these other threads that you have to follow to their logical conclusions to wrap up.
Yeah. So that's right. And I think the Times article lays it out pretty well, but they leave one reference out that I think would have helped. So the carrot side of the incentive to get someone to cooperate is, hey, you know a lot, you're important. And also, if you cooperate fully and tell us the truth about everything, we won't charge you. You get basically immunity, right, for being on the government side and helping the case. And then, of course, the stick is, we're going to investigate you and then we're going to put you in jail. So you better cooperate with us and prevent that. The problem with Nauta is he lied to them the first time they talked to him. So the Times doesn't really point that out or draw a lot of attention to that in this article. And that fact that they started out with Nauta deceiving them on the questions he was asking, that damages his ability to ever be a really good witness later on, because you'd have to bring that out on the stand, that first he lied and then later he told the truth. It also undermines the DOJ's estimation of him, right? So in order to be a full-on cooperator, you've got to be pretty sure that this person is telling you the truth and they're going to continue telling you the truth, even about things that could make them look bad. And it sounds like they really didn't probably have a lot of trust in Nauta right from the beginning, and rightfully so if he lied to them. Nevertheless, they ended up going with the stick and investigating the guy, and that is likely what led to the discovery of this text message between he and Calamari Sr. So let's step back for 1 second and think about this issue with the videotape. There's a couple of ways that concerns about how the videotape was handled, i.e. was it tampered with, may have come to light. It could be, let's say some other witness tells you something that they did on a particular day, let's say, hypothetically, walking down the hallway and going into the room with the boxes of documents. You would then go back and take the tape that you have and look at it to see if you could confirm that, because you'd want to prove that the witness had told you the truth. It's a way of corroborating the witness statement. Well, if you went back and looked at the tape and there was no sign of that witness doing that there, now you have an inconsistency. And one of the ways to explain that inconsistency is somebody's gone in and manipulated the tape. So that's one way that you could become aware of the fact that what was given to you may have been tampered with. Another way is just to have your video forensics folks, which we have very, very capable video forensics people at Quantico, the FBI does. There are telltale signs that are left on a video, whether it's old school tape or actual just DVR, that show where things have been taken out or put back in. It's pretty easy to get to the bottom of that. But in any case, it seems like DOJ has some real concerns here that somebody was playing fast and loose with the videos, which is straight up obstruction.
Yeah, and you brought up a great point about who else could have been involved in this, and there's a tiny, teeny one single sentence thing that didn't really get any airplay. That's in this report that says, and I'm quoting here, in interviews recently, the Justice Department has been focused on Walt Nauta and the help he received from a Mar-a-Lago maintenance worker in moving the boxes. So there you go. Maintenance worker could be very key, and I'm sure they are, according to this reporting and the sources that they have, that the DOJ knows about this maintenance worker and has been asking questions about this maintenance worker. So the amount of news that has come out of this, here's some more headlines, additional blockbuster headlines from the subsequent Times reporting. Jack Smith has obtained the confidential cooperation of a person who has worked for Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So this is the first cooperator that at least we know about, official cooperator. And that's not really, let me caveat that by saying we don't know if they're an official cooperator. We don't know if they've signed a cooperation deal. And we do know that there have been other folks cooperating with the Department of Justice, like Cassidy Hutchinson, and we hadn't heard that they had signed a cooperation agreement. And so this may just be one of those. But this is a big deal to have an inside person who worked at Mar-a-Lago to be a cooperator in the documents case.
Yeah, very, very big deal. I mean, this is how big cases are made. You get people who have access to the information that you need and good knowledge of what happened and ability to present it in an effective way as a witness, and you get them to officially go on board with the government as a cooperator. Typically, the way that happens is they are facing some sort of potential criminal liability or jeopardy themselves. And so they come in and they're debriefed in what some people call a queen for a day, which I think is both sexist and also doesn't really represent how many days it takes to do this. It takes much more than one day. But in any case, you bring them in and you put them in what we call a proffer session, where they basically give up everything that they know to the prosecutors and the agents present. And it has to include things that you did wrong, right? You have to expose yourself to the prosecutors and the agents in terms of your criminality. And at the end of all that, you write up this massive memo of everything they did and everything they know. And then you come to an agreement that this cooperator will plead guilty to some minimal charge. And at the end of their cooperation, the government will go before the judge and make a recommendation for a downward departure in sentence for whatever it is they pled guilty to.
It's like something like a 35. I can't. Memory is not serving, but the number 35 is involved.
Yeah, so it's 5K1 letter, I think, is actually the letter that goes to the judge.
35 is after the person.
Yeah, you're thinking of Rule 35.
Rule 35 is after the person's been sentenced.
Convicted, and then they start cooperating. Yeah, so a little bit different, but same result. You get a big break. And a lot of witnesses, especially white-collar type situations like this, will walk away with like no jail time or anything like that.
Right, nothing. Basically, you're free.
So that's how that's basically the process to become a cooperator. There are other people who just choose to cooperate. They decide they're going to tell what they know, and they haven't done anything wrong. But really, we refer to those people as witnesses, not cooperators.
That feels like Hutchinson, right?
Yeah, exactly. Someone who's just like, I've had it. I'm just going to say what's up, and they haven't actually done anything wrong, so they're not in any jeopardy.
Yeah, and the fact that this is worded like they've obtained confidential cooperation doesn't necessarily mean that it is a cooperator,
somebody signed up. Correct.
Right.
They keep saying in the article they have an insider at Mar-a-Lago who's cooperating, and that could just mean they have someone who has been a regular and frequent witness, has provided good information, who's actually still working at Mar-a-Lago. And that is like very, very valuable. When you have someone who's doing that, you also, and I'm not saying that this is happening in this case, but it would present the opportunity to have that person cooperate what we call proactively. So if you have an insider in the organization, you could say to them, hey, look for this, look for boxes with these sort of markings, go into this room and tell us what you find there. Or something as simple as the next time you're there, draw us a map of everything of what it looks like in the basement or something like that.
Or take a picture. One of these witnesses.
We need to know what it looks like inside this room, or we need to know, here's one that I've done many times. I need to know what the door lock looks like on this door. So go up close to it and take a picture with your cell phone, because that's like something that you would do in a very different situation when you were planning some sort of a tactical entry. You want to know what that hardware looks like because there's different ways to get past it. What's much more common is, hey, here's a little piece of equipment. Next time you see Mark Meadows, ask him this question and record his answer. That happens a lot. Those are called consensual recordings, and they can be very, very powerful pieces of evidence. So I don't know that any of these things are happening, but if you have an insider at Mar-a-Lago, that opens up a world of investigative possibilities.
And that's loosely worded here too, that the confidential cooperation of a person who has worked for Trump at Mar-a-Lago. So again, we don't know who it is, how long they've been cooperating, whether they're still there. But we do know the Justice Department is moving aggressively now to develop a fuller picture of how the documents Trump took with him from the White House were stored, who had access to them, how the security camera system at Mar-a-Lago works. Perhaps somebody could tell you where the cameras are located and which direction they're pointing, and what Trump told aides and his lawyers about what material he had and where it was, and possibly misled them. Now, the cooperating witness, Andy, is said to have provided investigators, just like I said, with a photo of the storage room where the material had been held, which at least seems to indicate that he was still at Mar-a-Lago while cooperating, unless he just likes to take photos of the inside of storage rooms,
Here's my collection of storage room photos. Oh, good. You happen to have one from Mar-a-Lago.
But if I knew something, if I worked at Mar-a-Lago and I was smart enough to know something was funky and going on, I might snap a few pictures to just have and hold and, that I might need at some point later. But, I
would say if you're anybody who's working someplace where they feel like they need to be collecting evidence of possible criminal activity at work, it's time for a new job. It's to go someplace else.
Yeah, or go to the FBI and say, you want me to wear a wire? Prosecutors believe Walt Nauta had failed to provide them with a full and accurate accounting of his role of movement of boxes containing the classified documents. And it seems as though this part of the investigation here with the surveillance footage is that they're trying to fill in the gaps. Mm-hmm. And they also say in the past few weeks, at least 4 more Mar-a-Lago employees have been subpoenaed, along with another person who had visibility into Trump's thinking when he first returned material to the archives. So that's also of note, because this opens us up to a whole gaggle of people, right? And we could talk about who might be this, this mole and who might not be. But I mean, it's potentially so many different people.
That's right.
Now, prosecutors have also issued several subpoenas to the Trump Organization, seeking additional surveillance footage from Mar-a-Lago. That's brand new reporting. It was big news when we heard about the initial subpoena on June 24th for their surveillance tapes. Now we know there have been subsequent subpoenas to the Trump Organization for additional footage. And prosecutors have questioned a number of witnesses about gaps in the footage. This brings me back to Nixon, my friend. This brings me back to the 18 minutes.
All
missing.
roads lead to Nixon.
Don't they? So there's potential gaps in this footage. And that led prosecutors to subpoena the software company that handles the surveillance footage for all the properties, Andy. And this could open the door, were it not for Walt Nauta refusing to cooperate because he's not a good witness, as your dad joke says. Now they have, surveillance footage for all the properties is no longer fruit of the poison tree.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's all very logical if you step back and look at it. They're obviously the video has been a big thing from the beginning. It's what got them really probably over the hurdle for the search warrant last summer. Now they see there's maybe some kind of fugazi aspects to the video. And so you're going to bring in more witnesses. You're going to expand your scope a little and start talking to people who are just have like technical roles at Mar-a-Lago, because you want to really nail down here, like who has access to the system? How do you work it? How, can you go, what happens to the tapes after they're, completed? How long are they held for? All that kind of stuff. And of course, if there's an outside contractor involved, that's even better, because now you're talking about like, Berkeley Research or Simpatico Software. Like they don't care. They don't want to be involved in this. You hit them with a subpoena and you're going to get their view of, you can imagine an offsite contractor who's managing the digital video recorder system. There are logs that, computers create logs every time commands are input and data is downloaded or changed. There are logs that indicate exactly what happened when, from what user, on what system.
Yeah, and there's brilliant analysts at the FBI
who
can track these keystrokes. about and follow the trail about what happened. And we also know that Molly Michael from previous reporting has been able to provide through her text messages a pretty good timeline of events that sort of have helped prosecutors drill down on this. And, keep in mind, too, prosecutors got to question Evan Corcoran about his phone call with Trump on June 24th, which is the day of the initial Department of Justice subpoena for the surveillance footage. And they got that testimony using the crime fraud exception to attorney-client privilege. So that phone call all of a sudden becomes a lot more important, because you and I had talked about this previously. It could have just been Corcoran picking up the phone and saying, Trump, we got a subpoena for our stuff. All right, go do the thing.
Yeah.
Now, especially since that testimony had to come pursuant to the application of the crime fraud exception from a federal judge, it makes that phone call a lot more interesting. And I'm really, really very interested about how, tell me, evidence question for you. If I have to go and subpoena surveillance footage from an organization about something that happened in one location, and that surveillance footage is all together for all the locations, am I now allowed to look at that other surveillance footage at Bedminster and Sterling and the Trump Tower and everything else? Or do I have to sequester that because it's not at the location that I'm having a question about? And does that tie into this next little bit of news that there are subpoenas to the Trump Organization about records pertaining to Trump's dealing with the professional golf venture known as Live Golf, which is the Saudi-backed venture that has been happening at Trump golf courses, and the PGA has been a thing in the golf world. I don't really follow the golf world too much, but there were people who were like, I'm going to be Team Live and I'm going to stay Team PGA and all this other stuff. But this is a Saudi-backed venture, and for some reason Jack Smith is looking into it. And what does that have to do with the documents case?
I mean, it's really hard to put that piece on the into the puzzle just yet. It's so kind of out of left field. So to answer your question about the subpoena, if it were a search warrant, the answer would probably be no. You have to stay within the four corners of the warrant, and you can only review that material that was specifically requested and described in the warrant. But subpoenas are a little different. The standard for a subpoena is just simple relevance, right? You can, if you have an investigation going, you can serve a grand jury subpoena, and as long as the subpoena is not overly broad, and as long as it is designed to reasonably target material that could potentially be relevant in the investigation, then it's fair game. So,
because if I were a defense attorney, I would do the fruit of the poisonous tree argument. Like, hey, you were investigating document movement and surveillance at Mar-a-Lago, and all of a sudden now you have video footage of MBS at Bedminster burying documents in Ivana's grave. I'm kidding. But whatever else comes out of it that isn't sort of, like you said, within the four corners of that search warrant. But I'm wondering now if we're not going to be able to, if we're not be able to, but if we're going to see potential searches of other properties based on surveillance
that's where I was
footage.
going.
Yeah.
That's where I was heading. Like, not knowing exactly how this Live Golf angle features in the narrative here, you can't rule out the idea that other locations, and therefore the video surveillance of those locations, might be relevant.
Yeah. So
it's just hard to say. I can't imagine how you get there right now because I really don't understand the Live Golf thing. But, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. Like, I think it's possible. Obviously, Jack Smith and his team know a lot more than we do about the facts and what they're dealing with and where they're going, where they think they need to go. Mm-hmm. So really, we're still in that moment where anything could be possible.
Well, and everybody thought I was crazy when I made a big deal about that secret meeting, that little golf without the golfing that Trump held on his Sterling course in Virginia, where he met with folks about the Live Golf tournament, and Epstein and Mike Roman were there. And I was like, what's going on here? How many of these guys have been subpoenaed? What are they talking about? I was like, you're crazy. But it makes that meeting a little more interesting because that involved the LIV tournament. And, I just watched Mary McCord speculate on Deadline White House, and this is pure speculation. But she says, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Donald may have used some of his classified documents. He didn't want to give some of them back. In order to maybe blackmail the Saudis into investing in his golf tournament or at least holding them at his properties, or that he was meeting with the Saudis about some of the information he had, because he did mention that Nixon could have made $18 million off of his tapes, which also had gaps. But it's very
Gappy tapes.
Gappy tapes. It's just interesting.
I feel like that should be a band's name, Gappy Tapes, but all right, maybe not.
It's just interesting that the LIV tournament came up in just this one rando non sequitur paragraph, and I'm like, oh, what? That should be a whole separate story, you guys. But there were just so many headlines in this thing.
I agree, and I like Mary's comment about focusing on what Trump may or may not have done with the classified information that we know he had, because that kind of takes us to the other side of the story, right? We've been focused so much on who moved the boxes when and what do the videos show of the boxes moving around and all that kind of stuff. It's important, but it forces you to remember, like, there is a question here, and there have been allegations in public reporting recently that he was showing documents and showing maps and things to guests at Mar-a-Lago. So if they've developed that line of inquiry and they have some reason to believe that someone associated with the LIV Golf organization, whether that's, political figures, whatever, connected to the royal family in Saudi Arabia or not, those people were at Mar-a-Lago. It's not unreasonable that you would subpoena LIV Golf to get those individuals to testify about what they had seen or what they had been shown. So it's kind of an interesting prospect. It is completely speculative at this point, but an interesting one nevertheless.
Yeah, and if there's other side things involved here with the Saudis that don't have to do with the documents case, those can be pursued separately. That we don't have to wait for those to follow the end of the road of investigation to bring charges in the documents case. But it's still all well within the scope. A couple other things here. This is such a big show because there's so much news. Corcoran, according to this reporting, Corcoran testified that several Trump employees told him the Mar-a-Lago storage room was the only place where the documents were kept. Corcoran also recounted to the grand jury how Trump did not tell his lawyers of any other locations where documents were stored, which may have effectively misled the legal team. Also, in interviews recently, the Justice Department has been focused on Walt Nauta, we said, and that maintenance man. That was an interesting tidbit again. They've asked multiple people questions about moving boxes, as well as questions about the security cameras, what they did and did not capture, so that presumably so they can compare it to what they got pursuant to the subpoena and what's missing. And that's why I believe that they're able to tell that there are gaps there. Specifically, they've asked questions about whether Nauta was walking to or from the residence on the property, according to a person briefed on the matter. And a lot of this part of the investigation, like I said, is because they weren't able to get Nauta's cooperation. But Mike Schmidt told Nicole Wallace he thinks the DOJ, this, using the stick instead of the carrot, backfired on Jack Smith because it failed to get Nauta's cooperation. But I don't see it that way. Mary McCord also said, Jack wouldn't indict the documents case on the cooperation of Walt Nauta. Right?
No, it's certainly not when Nauta started out his interaction with the government, but by lying about what he knew.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I don't think they would rest the whole thing on that. And I'm sure that when they went in with the stick instead of the carrot, they were like, "Hey, if he doesn't take the bait, we can just investigate him and get all this stuff and get all the surveillance tapes and get all the everything. If he does, I mean, and honestly." A lot of times when you get a cooperating witness, you don't get as much information as you would as if you're full on investigating them. So I don't know that I agree with that characterization of the DOJ made a mistake, but
I
here
think
we
it's
are.
it's too early to tell. And they also say in the article that Naughta's attorneys have now cut off all communication with DOJ. It's not a bad play on Naughta's part, to be honest.
Who's paying them?
Yeah, and I mean,
that's also being investigated.
It may be that the meter just ran out. He neglected to put another quarter in, but he knows they're interested in him. He knows they want his testimony. He's not really fully on board yet, so he's going to let it hang out there a little bit and see what happens. If he ends up in trouble, i.e., he gets indicted, I'm fairly confident he'll take another strike at cooperating. And that's just that's the cat and mouse game.
Is that kind of how it goes? Like, oh yeah, go ahead and I dare you. And then they indict you and you go, okay.
Put up or shut up. What do you got? Here's what I got. I got a 16-count indictment. Okay, let's sit down and
right,
because
they may have only presented him with an indictment like a 1001 charge when he lied to them. And now they might come back with obstruction of justice, which is a 20-year max charge on the 1519 count. So, or at least 5 years if you're looking at regular obstruction of justice. And that might be a little more persuasive.
The problem, though, it's a dicey game for Mr. Naughta to play because by the time he gets indicted, other people have been as well. Many additional witnesses have been into the grand jury. You've gone out and subpoenaed every other resort and the live golf
that's why
people.
You cooperate early and often,
that's
right? Because the first guy gets the best deal.
That's right.
And Jack Smith might, no, cooperate. No, we don't need you anymore.
Don't need you now.
You made us go for 3 more months on this fucking investigation to get all of this information. And now we have enough to nail you to the wall. You had your chance. You missed it, Walt.
Yeah. So, everybody's trying to suss everybody else out and see what hand are they playing and how late can you go in the game. Yeah, he still works for Trump. He still travels with him. So he's clearly not decided, okay, I got to get on the side of, Team America here.
Maybe they got his mom. Remember they were talking, somebody said like Walt Naughta's mom had something to say about the whole thing.
Mrs. Naughta.
And who knows who the cooperator is. It could be the maintenance worker. Could be Evan Corcoran. Could be Molly Michael. Could be one of the, dozens of other staffers that work there. It could be, we don't know who it is. I'm excited to learn and I'm sure we might. But all this reporting, Andy, also speaks to the broad scope of Jack Smith's investigation. It started with January 6th, documents and obstruction of either of those. Now it's grown to include the super PACs, wire fraud, and the payment of witness lawyers. We have additional obstruction with possible evidence tampering with the surveillance tapes. And now we've got the Live Golf Tournament wrapped up in here, which could lead to other Saudi investments in the Trump family, including Kushner. And I mean, who knows where this will go, but he is not, this isn't the Mueller investigation. This isn't Rod Rosenstein saying you can investigate these 2 things and only these 6 things about the first thing and only these 3 things about the second thing. And, meanwhile, talking to Trump saying, don't worry, I'll land the plane and just continuing to narrow the scope, which was one of the obstruction charges in Volume 2 was the trying to narrow the scope of the Mueller investigation. And he's not walking around, on a knife's edge, wondering if he's going to be fired by Merrick Garland. So
that's right. Garland's basically said, have at it and let me know when you're done. And it's clearly they are having at it. This is a wide-ranging, aggressive, forward-leaning investigation. I'm honestly, his biggest enemy right now is the clock. At some point, he's going to have to decide what to do early enough on in the game that he can actually do it without getting all bollocksed up in DOJ policy.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. We have a little bit more news to get to. I know you think that's the end of the show because we've been talking at you for an hour. But no, we do have a little bit more to get to, but we have to take a quick break. Stick around.
When people are curious, they turn to Google for answers. So why not use Google Ads to turn that curiosity into customers for your business? With Google Ads, you can reach the right audience with the right message based on what they're curious about. Whether you're looking to drive sales, generate leads, or increase brand awareness, Google Ads has solutions tailored to your marketing goals. Google Ads. Turn curiosity into customers. Visit ads.google.com today.
For the Millers, movie nights were once tradition. Now Sarah could hardly get through the opening credits, not on that old couch. But one day, while shopping on QVC.com, she learned La-Z-Boy recliners had slimmed down a bit. And in just a few clicks, Sarah got her La-Z-Boy chair and a popcorn maker and a soundbar by Bose. And with one quick trip to QVC.com, movie night and Sarah's back were saved. Shop QVC.com/podcast and use code QVC20podcast for $20 off $40 for new customers. This is shopping brought to life.
We made USAA insurance for veterans like James. When he found out how much USAA was helping members save, he said,
"It's time to switch."
We'll help you find the right coverage at the right price. USAA. What you're made of, we're made for. Restrictions apply.
All right, everybody, welcome back. We now have testimony from a fourth member of the Ocha Nostra. That's half. Quattro Nostra have testified.
You beat me to it. You absolutely beat me to it. I was like, what's it?
You're going Quattro Nostra?
Quattro, yeah.
All right, and this is Dan Scavino, one Dan Scavino. So as you know, the Ocha Nostra is our name. Thank you, Aaron, who named the Ocha Nostra. It's 8 people: Meadows, Stephen Miller, Dan Scavino, John Ratcliffe, Robert O'Brien, Nick Luna, Johnny McEntee, and Ken Cuccinelli.
There you go.
And 4 have now. The testimony here is pursuant to former Chief Judge Beryl Howell rejecting Donald Trump's attempts to block all their testimony using executive privilege. The appellate court denied Trump's appeal and would not issue a stay, and Cuccinelli was brought in that afternoon.
Get them while they're hot. Get them in quick.
And so we know that Miller, Cuccinelli, and Ratcliffe had already testified. And this week is Dan Scavino's turn. Scavino was held in contempt with Navarro.
Yes.
And referred to the Department of Justice, but the Department of Justice only went after Navarro. They did not.
Right, held in contempt of Congress.
Contempt of Congress. They decided to not prosecute criminal contempt for Dan Scavino. Scavino helped spread false claims of voter fraud. He might know what went into those fundraising emails. I don't know, but he was very big on the voter fraud thing and the big lie. He also has information about discussions with Trump on January 5th about convincing members of Congress not to certify the election. And he has info about Trump's movements on January 6th, because it's very important, that had he wanted to go to the Capitol, and now, we just got the seditious conspiracy convictions of the Proud Boys and Tario specifically, who wasn't anywhere near the Capitol. He was in Baltimore that day. So that's, I think, of note, Trump's movements on January 6th, because if he wanted to go to the Capitol, that could show what his intent was. And info about the White House communication strategy leading up to the attack on the Capitol. So that's what's going on there. And then we also have some other news from CNN, right?
That's right. So we also learned this week from CNN's Caitlin Polantz and Jamie Gangel that special counsel Jack Smith sat in on the federal grand jury proceeding while former Vice President Mike Pence testified for more than 5 hours last week. So while there, apparently Smith and Pence had some interaction while Pence was at the courthouse, which makes sense. And one source described the interaction as respectful. Smith's appearance is the first known time the special counsel has attended a grand jury proceeding in the investigation, which is also, I would expect that to be the case.
So what about that, Andy? Because if that's the first time, I don't know if that's the first time, but talk to me about Smith's participation. Did Mueller go into the federal grand jury at all, or did he just have the line prosecutors do it? Why do you think Jack Smith himself wanted to be there? Is it because the gravity of having a former vice president there? I mean, what's your take?
Well, it was certainly intentional, right? It's not like, I had the hour. I figured I'd go over there.
Did he wear his purple robe? And
I hope so. I hope he went full Jack style. I'm thinking about donning that look for myself, just motoring around the house. But anyway,
I'm gonna see if I can get some Hague robes for you.
I'll need some help with the beard, though. Mine would be like white. I'd look more like David Letterman than Jack Smith.
That's
all
okay.
Right. Okay, sorry for the distraction. So Mueller did not go. Mueller, which also was not surprising, Mueller was an incredibly hands-on leader and wanted to know exactly what was going on at all times. And once you told him what was going on, he'd ask you a lot of questions and then make it very clear to you what he wanted your next steps to be. But he was not the kind of guy that would actually go do it, right? I think Mueller had more of almost more of a military respect for chain of authority. Like he's not going to reach down and start doing the job of the guy beneath him. Jack Smith is at a different place in his career than Mueller was when Mueller was special counsel. Mueller had been FBI director for 12 years. Certainly a distinguished prosecutor in his own past, homicide prosecutor in the D.C. district, kind of notably. But it had been a long time since Mueller had ever gone into a grand jury. It doesn't surprise me that he didn't go. Nothing wrong with not going. He had unbelievably accomplished people to do that work for him. Jack Smith does also. He's got very serious prosecutors who spent a lot of time in grand juries. It's not like he needs to go in there to supervise what these folks are doing. He went in for some reason. He was either sending a message to Mike Pence about the seriousness of this testimony and how kind of, once in a lifetime it was. Is not every day that the vice president, former VP, comes in to testify against his old boss. Or he was possibly sending a message to the public. Like, this is my hand on the tiller. I'm making these calls. I am watching the progress of this very closely. And either way, I think that's the message I got from hearing that he was in there. I think it's kind of a bold move. I like it. I think it's a good look for him. It's great for his team because it really shows him as a guy as, leads from the front and gives them, supports them in what they're doing. Doesn't leave them hanging out there to deal with the former number two.
Right, like I'm willing to do this work too with you, down in the weeds, and then here maybe he passed out Hague robes to all of his team.
That would be great. So
I'm sorry, I'm stuck on the robes, but this is I don't mean to make light of this because this is a very serious situation, and I think that's evidenced by his presence during the testimony of the former vice president.
Yeah, and I'd like to say something about the respectful interaction real quick, and why I'm not surprised by that at all. So, to throw back to a little reference from my time as in the Bureau. So I was at the White House one day for a meeting, and I was leaving, and I got a call from the White House. Oddly enough, I was sitting in my car right outside the West Wing, and I was being summoned to the vice president's office about what? I had no idea. Turns out this was right around the beginning of the whole Mike Flynn debacle. And right around the time that we discovered this evidence, I'll say, about Mike Flynn's conversations.
Having lied to Mike Pence. Right.
Mm-hmm. So
you're deputy director at that time?
That's correct. Yeah. So I go to the vice president's office, and he's in there along with a few other folks, Don McGahn and others. And basically, long story short, they wanted to see the actual evidence itself that proved conclusively that Mike Flynn had lied to the vice president, and as it turns out, other people about his conversations with the Russian ambassador. So I had someone get that evidence and bring it back to the White House for me, and I sat with him in a room in the sit room, one of the conference rooms downstairs, because it was confidential or classified information that we were looking at, so we had to go down to the sit room, and he read it, and the conclusion is not, it's really, I'm sure it was uncomfortable for him. It was clear that he was frustrated with what he was reading, confronting the fact that he'd been lied to by the National Security Advisor. And he was pretty frustrated, but the entire time he conducted himself like a gentleman. And I give him credit to that. To this day, he sat there, he didn't pitch a fit, he was respectful and courteous, and as he got up to leave the room, and this is a guy who's just had some really bad news laid on him, he stopped to look at me, thanked me for my service and for helping him out, showing him what he needed to see, and then he left the room, and I thought, you know what, that was uncomfortable as hell, but Mike Pence, pretty respectful guy, handled himself like a gentleman. So I would expect that he did the same thing in the grand jury with Jack Smith. Uncomfortable, don't want to be here, fought it, lost, kind of won a little bit, but really pretty much lost, had to be here. But nevertheless, he probably put a smile on his face and shook hands and, exchanged
He's also not a
pleasantries.
target here, and so it's, if nobody ever wants to go testify before a grand jury.
Oh,
ever.
God, no.
But he's not a target, and this could potentially, whatever comes out of this, actually help his campaign for president if he decides to run. So.
It could help it or kill it. So who knows? It's That one's up in the air, I think.
It could make Trump even less electable. Let's just say that.
There you go.
Whoever steps up and fills that gap, who if anyone can do it, I don't think Pudding Fingers can, but everybody else is just polling so dismally. Anyway, I would expect the same thing. Just a fascinating amount of news this week, my friend. And I hate to speculate what'll happen next week, but I'm sure it'll be even more. So before we go, let's get to one of our listener questions. Again, if you have a question for either me or Andy or both of us, you can send it to us at hello@MuellerSheWrote.com and just put Jack in the subject line. Andy, who do we have this week?
All right, this week we have Michael, and Michael gave us a really long question, which I'm going to edit significantly here. Sorry, Michael, that's what happens in the big time media world.
Oop, redacted.
What happened?
You just redacted a bunch of his question.
You're right.
You got really serious for a second.
I know. I was like, oh my God, did I just step on it? Did I just leak classified onto the Jack podcast? I don't think I did, though, for the record. I don't think I did. And if I did, it was mine. It's all mine. I get to keep it anyway.
You can declassify anything you want. You were the head of the FBI.
That's right. I thought it, so it happened. Okay. Michael says, is it reasonable to believe or expect that the DOJ, maybe Fani Willis in Georgia, and anyone else investigating Trump are thinking about him as a potential flight risk? He has autocratic friends around the world, his own airplane, and the means to get out of the country. Okay, so that's a really good question. And flight risk is relevant. Short answer is, but not right now. There's really nothing that any of those investigators can do at this point in their investigations. Trump has not been charged with anything in Georgia or federally yet, and so he can move around as much as he wants. The New York case is a little bit different. They don't do pretrial detention in New York anymore on flight risk grounds, so it's kind of not relevant up there. But if Trump is charged in, let's say, in a federal case, in federal cases, you get bail. That the argument to get bail, the government, if they want to deny you bail, which means you get held in jail until your trial, it comes down to two things. One is danger to the community, and the other is risk of flight. In this case, if Trump is indicted federally, there's really no argument for danger to the community. He's got no prior offenses, no violence in his past, anything like that.
The only thing I could think of is something that Pete brought up with respect to Jack Teixeira investigation, who is being held in pretrial release, not only because he's a physical, violent risk to the public, but and that was his thing. But Pete said, also if he has been perhaps leaking classified information that could endanger the lives of sources, human sources, or something like that, then that could potentially be it. But that's a big long shot. I don't know. You know better than me about that.
It's a bit of a long shot. Now, you've got some things to consider on the danger to the community side for him, just because of all the weapons and everything else, and his statements about engaging in mass killings and things like that.
Jack Teixeira.
Jack Teixeira, yeah. On the other hand, he also had, it seems like the government doesn't really have a good sense of how much he actually took and where it is and where he put it. And it also seems like he's not quite, fully cooperating at this point. So yeah, I think there's an argument to be made there in the Teixeira case. Not so much in the Trump case, certainly on danger to the community. Risk of flight, you could make an argument there because of the plane, because of his ability to go anywhere in the world, because of his money, can take, he has the ability to get to where he wants to be. You can answer some of those questions by seizing his passport. You could also let him stay on, home confinement, which I can't imagine that ever happening to someone who's currently running for the presidency. So I don't think there's much there. The bottom line is, if you're really worried,
that and he showed up to all of his other stuff.
Yeah, he's never, he hasn't failed to show up yet. If you're investigating someone and you're really worried about them leaving the jurisdiction and therefore never getting to complete your investigation with an indictment and arrest, the answer is hurry up. Get it done while they're here. Yeah. Sometimes that's why you bring a case down a little bit before you had planned, because, you got to get it done before somebody runs away. I'm not saying that Trump
I think
would
if
do
he
that,
were a
but
flight risk or anything like that, we might have seen an arrest, or if he had some sort of evidence that could be destroyed. I mean, we saw this happen quite a bit with some of the folks in the Mueller investigation, Roger Stone, they went and they got him because there was evidence about to be destroyed, and you could probably get that arrest warrant. But again, I don't think he's a flight risk. And what can they actually, if he does, let's say, flee to a country with no extradition treaty, can he be tried in absentia? Do we do that here?
No, we don't on criminal cases. But if he did flee, there'd be an outstanding warrant for his arrest as an
Interpol red notice or whatever.
Yeah. You would take your the indictment and you would have it. You would log it with Interpol, put out a red notice. He wouldn't be able to travel anywhere that has extradition with the United States for fear of getting arrested overseas and then extradited back. So he'd basically have to stay out of here forever, which is a result in and of itself.
Seems like a win-win. We got an indictment.
Trying to minimize,
and he'll never be back here. Yeah, you can't run for president from Russia. I know that.
No, I don't think you could do that. That would be hard. So anyway, thank you,
Great
Michael,
question.
for the question.